Now, while Jeff is going to set up his laptop, I'm going to introduce you. So if you look at the some people that is being named as community star, Jeff is the star that came out right after the Big Bang. So he's the number one. So this is right after the Big Bang, Jeff appeared as community star. He's been in Alfresco since the very beginning, more than 10 years. He was chief community officer for until 2014. Many developers grew up reading his documentation, the developer's guide, all the blog posts in ecmarchitect.com. So you can check out in his biography all the things that he has done for the community. He has been speaking also in several conferences. There are a very impressive list. And now he's adding Beacon to that list, which is going to make it even better. And, well, the order of the bee, as you know, kind of started from the analogy that he presented in the summit in 2013. And now he's going to talk about zombies. So I don't know what is going to be the outcome if they the previous one was about bees. Well, I don't know. So ZombieCon. This a ZombieCon, yes. So please welcome Jeff Potts.
Awesome. Imagine my surprise at 5 in the morning when a maintenance worker from the hotel walked into my hotel room unannounced. That happened to me this morning. It has nothing to do with my talk, but I just wanted you to feel kind of what I felt at that moment when my door literally threw open and a maintenance worker walked in to where I yelled some words that I won't repeat in polite company, and then he turned around and walked out. Apparently, he thought that I had checked out and they were going to work on the room, and he had a key that was able to open my room, and in my hotel, there's no deadbolt, and there's no way to keep someone from doing that. So I'm a little bit foggy because I got up too early, but we're going to make it work. So I am Jeff Potts. I work for Metaversant Group, which is a tiny consulting firm focused on content technologies, Alfresco, Elasticsearch, and other technologies. I also write a blog called ECM Architect, which hopefully some of you have been to, and it's kind of wild. It's been more than 10 years since I started covering Alfresco, and when I say it out loud, it makes me feel old and strange, but it also makes me feel proud because I know it helps a lot of people. So I wrote a blog post recently called "Would the commercial open source software that you depend on survive a zombie attack?" And what I want to do today, that blog post was very generic. It was about any commercial open source software. What I want to do today is talk about Alfresco specifically. And so if you didn't read the blog post, that's okay. I'll sort of set the scene. So imagine that you woke up this morning not by your friendly hotel maintenance worker checking in on your slumber, but instead to the news that a global zombie attack had occurred. Now, this is a strange zombie attack because what happened was the zombies attacked, they were put down, thankfully, but unfortunately, every Alfresco employee was turned into a zombie. So if you receive a paycheck from Alfresco, I'm sorry, but you are now a zombie and you have no more interest in helping us support Alfresco. Zombies do not want your JMX dump. They will not work on your Sev1 ticket. They don't give a crap about the roadmap or release 5.2 or 6.0 or whatever. Zombies just want to eat brains, in case you're not familiar with how zombies work. Now, I've talked in the past about commercial open source being like a honey farm. And it's true. Still think it's true. And Boris touched on this yesterday. Now we've got this nightmare scenario where we're a bunch of bees, and the honey farmers have no interest in helping farm the honey. Without the honey farmer, it's just us bees and the flowers. So there is no more John Newton with cool Bruegel pictures that he's showing us and talking about the vision. There's no more Thomas DeMeo setting out a roadmap. There's no more David Webster doing cool share and records management code. There's no more Samuel Langlois doing builds and releasing the code for us. It's all up to us. The people in this room, quite literally, it would all be up to us. So, is this a far-fetched scenario, this zombie attack? Who knows who this person is? Anyone? This is Monty. Do you know who it is now? Okay, now I see some recognition now. Monty is the person who created MySQL. MySQL was bought in 2008 by Sun for $1 billion. In 2009, Oracle bought Sun. Monty got nervous. He said, it seems like Oracle might have a product that competes a little bit with my product. I've never heard of it, but apparently this is true. And this, so Monty said, I think Oracle might actually kill this project. And so Monty left in 2009, and he started MariaDB. And he did that to save the technology, and he did it to save the people that work on that technology. And he wanted to ensure that a free version of MySQL always existed. Stuff happens, is the point, right? Companies get acquired. Resources get withheld from projects. Companies lose interest, or they shift their focus. Stuff happens. Now, many people will say, well, Fresco is open. That's why we went with Alfresco. They're the open source ECM choice. And salespeople, marketing people, John Newton, I've heard that said so many times. We are open. Therefore, there's less risk. If we are to go away, there's the code. And the problem with that argument is that software doesn't release itself. It doesn't build itself. It doesn't test itself. That's the problem. It is very cool that it's been released with a license that would allow us to have that source code if Alfresco went away. That's amazing. No one else is doing that. So that's awesome. But what happens the day after that when someone starts to say, hey, there's some broken stuff in here that maybe we need to fix? Or, hey, how about some cool features? I mean, where does that come into play, right? Your company all of a sudden is going to maintain 1 million lines of Alfresco code? I don't think so. So, here's another example. Hopefully, I mean, we're in the backyard of this guy. You know who this is, right? Yes. Thank you. This is Dries Buytaert. Probably not saying his last name correctly, but he's a Belgian success story. I mean, he's more than a Belgian success story. This guy is just a success story. Amazing. In Antwerp, right down the road, in his dorm room, Dries created Drupal, which now runs who knows how many websites. It's incredible. Drupal existed long before Acquia came along. Acquia is a commercial company that provides support and add-ons and things like that for Drupal. Drupal is an organic open source project. It's not like Alfresco in that way. Drupal is a true organic open source project. Drupal 7 had 1,000 committers. 1,000 committers, Drupal 7. Acquia, the commercial company, has 600 employees. By the way, that seems like a lot of employees for what they do, but whatever. The point is, twice as many committers as there are employees for the commercial company behind it. How many committers does Alfresco have that don't work for Alfresco? And everyone knows the answer to that, but we'll get back to that. So, the point is, could Alfresco, the project, survive without Alfresco, the company? Some of you may already have some thoughts, but what I did was I said, okay, how would any commercial open source project survive without the company? And I came up with like 10 factors that you could score it. I'm a consultant. We like to do scoring things. I could probably even put it on a chart and sell it to somebody, who knows. But I want to look at those 10 factors in terms of Alfresco, and we're going to start with the negative ones. So these are negative indicators. So these are things that kind of make you think, probably not, right? These are the negative things. And so there's 7 negative ones and 3 positive ones. Now that it's not as simple as just going, well, therefore it's a negative. No, these don't just balance out that way. But let's look at these. So the first one is pre-commercial open source success. This is the Drupal story. If you are very successful pre-commercially, then it's logical that if that commercial backer were to go away, then the project would succeed. If something happened to Dries or something happened to Acquia, Drupal would bounce back. They would be sad, just like we would, if all of our Alfresco colleagues were turned into zombies. It would be a terrible thing. I mean, it would be hard to get over something like that. But Drupal would continue without a hitch because they were so successful before the commercial company came along. Independent governance model. And by the way, Alfresco has been commercial from the beginning. So that's why this is a negative indicator. There is no pre-commercial open source success for Alfresco because there is no pre-commercial Alfresco. Independent governance model. If a project has an independent organization that's in charge of governance, how that project is run, then it's less likely that that project would die if the commercial backer went away because there's a neutral, independent party that's controlling the evolution or at least directing the evolution of the project and how that project runs. So if you have a project that's run by something that's independent, then it has more likely to succeed. Alfresco has no such body. There is no independent governance model for Alfresco. Therefore, that's a negative indicator. Number of external committers, we've already talked about. There are 0 external committers for Alfresco. The reason why this is important, if we have a project with a lot of external committers, then all of a sudden the committers that are employed by the commercial backer goes away. You still have enough committers to move forward with the code. It takes deep knowledge to understand how these platforms work. And when you don't have people that are in it making fundamental changes to the code, that's a problem for survivability. Product complexity. I have several open source projects that I maintain. They range from a few lines to more, but they're simple. If something happens to me on the way back to Dallas, I invite any of you or all of you to take up my simple projects and move them forward. You'll have no problem whatsoever coming up to speed on any of my code. It is not complex. Alfresco is the opposite of that. Somebody said yesterday 1 million lines of code in Alfresco. It would take some doing for any of us in the room. I don't care if, who you are in the room. If you're Axel Faust, Axel, where's Axel? Oh, he's doing the hackathon. But it would take Axel a little while to come up to speed on 1 million lines of code, right, to help us move the product forward. So that's a problem. It's not one that we can do much about. It is what it is, but it is a factor. Number of external contributions. There have been external contributions to Alfresco, some really cool ones, by the way. But mostly, it's bug fixes. If you just look at it on the whole and you sort of divide it up, the types of contributions that are made, it's bug fixes and things like that. There is no hand-in-hand development going on. So even major features that have been incorporated, most of those, like if we look at the PDF viewer that Peter Lofgren worked from Loftex, that was something that he worked on with some other folks and as part of Share Extras, and then it was sort of ingested into Alfresco. It wasn't made hand-in-hand with Alfresco engineering. So there are not that many significant external contributions. If you have a lot of those, then you have people who know the code and could take it forward. Downstream dependencies. This would be other open source projects that depend on Alfresco, that embed Alfresco in their open source projects. That's important because if something were to happen to Alfresco, those downstream projects could potentially help us out. And then company diaspora just means, has there been a lot of turnover amongst engineering? Because if there are people out in the market that didn't get turned into zombies but used to work for Alfresco, we might be able to convince them to join our cause, right? And pretty much, Alfresco engineering, we were just talking yesterday, is a very senior bunch. And a lot of the original engineers that came from Documentum and other places are still there, which is awesome. That is great for the product, but it's not very good if we wanted to grab some of those people and have them help us move the product forward. Now, there are some nice things that indicate that we could survive if something like this were to happen. The install base of strategic accounts with deep pockets. We heard yesterday John Newton say that a third of the business for Alfresco comes from the US government. That is certainly a strategic account with some deep pockets. We're going to revisit this towards the end of the talk, but the government's not the only account that's doing major work on top of Alfresco that would have an incentive to keep the project going if the company were to change direction. Upstream dependencies. Alfresco is built on a lot of open source projects, some very significant, solar, Spring, things like that. And so if you can imagine if Alfresco went away and we were having problems with solar, there would be some solar people we could leverage in the community that don't work for Alfresco that could probably help us out, so that's good. And the third thing is the community makeup. If you have a community that's very disengaged and they're just sort of like, yeah, whatever, then it's not going to, no one's going to be too excited about taking the project forward because this is going to be, or would be, a lot of work. But I mean, the community put this conference on. They said, Alfresco said, man, we're not going to do a conference. And the community said, we'll have one. And it happened. I mean, this is really cool. So, yeah. That's the kind of passion and drive and focus that would be needed if we were busy dealing with zombies and trying to also solve ECM problems, which seems like there might be that's the priority, by the way, that we would want to fix that. Fix the zombie problem first and then work on ECM. Okay, so what about the order of the bee? What about the order of the bee? This is what the order does today. Publishes community success stories. Alfresco, and I don't fault them for this, Alfresco is not going to say, look at all these amazing success stories we have around Community Edition. They will not do that. It's not in their interest, and we shouldn't expect them to do that. We, as a community, need to do that, and that's one of the things that the order does. Listing the best add-ons. So there's a team on the order that has come up with a criteria that says, this makes a good add-on, and they vet add-ons against that criteria, and then they publish that list. Publishing a professional services network. It's hard for people to find good quality integrators who work on Community Edition. And so we have a list of those on the Order of the Bee website. Curating tutorials and articles. So a lot of this is about marketing and letting people know it's okay to run Community Edition in production. And to help with adoption and help with learning curve and things like that. Redistributing Alfresco CE, so there's a Community Edition distro that comes with a Puppet-based installer. So if you're way into Puppet and you want to automate your installs and configs, Order of the Bee has something that can help you do that. It's called Honeycomb. So check that out. And then puts on a conference. But have you ever read the mission for the Order of the Bee? You're at the conference, I assume you read the mission. You're here, you paid to come here, you didn't read the mission before you got here? What if our mission was something terrible to do with like puppies and kittens or something, and oh my God, you went to the anti-puppy, anti-kitten conference? My God. Well, here's the mission. I hope you all read it. Our mission is to guarantee the existence of Alfresco Community Edition as a free Libre open source solution for document management. Guarantee the existence of that software. That is a big promise. We thought about that before we decided that was our mission, right? I mean, it seems like a big deal. So all those things that I just showed you that we do are important, and those need to be done. But if we're not doing things that guarantee the existence of Community Edition, we're not fulfilling our mission, right? So I think this gives us a way to think about what kinds of activities should we be doing related to Order of the Bee. And I think some of that is survivability gaps. That's why we stand up at a conference and we ask the Alfresco management team why there are no external committers, and when is that going to happen, even though we've been asking for it for 9 years. That's why we want a public test suite. That they mentioned yesterday in that panel there would be testing, that was a big focus. That should be public. We should know how the nightly tests are running, and we should be able to get a hold of those. How about documented and tested upgrade paths between community versions? I'll bet you there are people in this room running 2.x Community Edition right now because you're afraid to upgrade. There's a hand, at least one hand just went up. You're afraid to upgrade. That shouldn't be. I don't know why that is. Lighter weight community distro. So Puppet is awesome, but how about something that Peter Lofgren has done? He's packaged up Community Edition, backports the critical security issues, and makes that available. It's awesome. That's the kind of stuff we need to be thinking about. There are a lot of places that we can look to get examples. You can look at Adobe and what they do with Jackrabbit, which is part of Apache. Adobe sells some expensive software. If you think Alfresco is expensive, get a quote for Adobe Experience Manager sometime. It's laughable, but it's built on Jackrabbit, which is open source. Elastic has a great business model that we can look at and convince Alfresco that this is important. External committers, look at how Apache treats external committers. Mozilla, look at Alfresco's own project, Activity, an open source project that has 115 contributors right now. Do I really need to justify to Alfresco why that makes sense when their own project, Activity, has been so successful in the model? Why can't we do that for Alfresco? Nuxio, all their testing, their entire testing chain is public. If you want to see how the tests for Nuxio for the nightly build ran last night, you can do that right now. Loftex, I already mentioned, with the community-led distro. I'm running out of time, but I want to tell one more story, and it's about OpenOffice. In July, Star Office was released as open source by Sun. And it was OpenOffice, and Sun built some products, some products on top of OpenOffice. The members of the community started to say, hey, Sun, we don't think that you're involving the community enough in how you write your code, how you make decisions. We would like a more egalitarian model for how you do things. And Sun said, you know what, you're right. We're going to put OpenOffice in a neutral foundation, and we're gonna have our governance model be there. And the community said, that's awesome. Then Oracle bought Sun before that could be done. And the product languished, actually, for a while. And people in the community were pissed. And they actually forked. And that's how LibreOffice was born. And then shortly after that, Oracle said, I guess we're going to be done with this now. And they fired all the people that work for OpenOffice that were developing code. They discontinued the code, gave the code and the trademark, not to the Document Foundation, which is where LibreOffice was, but to the Apache Software Foundation. So, as the chart might suggest, you wound up with a shitstorm of forks at the end, multiple forks, one I hadn't even heard of OpenOffice. I don't want this for Alfresco. I don't want to run the US government's fork of Alfresco. My clients don't either, and I'll bet you guys don't either. If we do nothing, if we stop having this conversation, and something terrible happens with Alfresco, as much as we do not want that to happen, strategic accounts and partners would attempt to take the code forward. They would have no choice. They would have to do that, but they would do it with their own best interests in mind, not a larger community best interest. They would not have to make that public. They might or might not make it available as part of a foundation. There would we would have multiple forks of Alfresco, just like what happened with OpenOffice. Maybe a single version would emerge over time. Meanwhile, users would be leaving in droves for other solutions. Why would they stick around with a mess when they could go use Nuxio or something like that? And we'd have a lot of angry bees. This room is smiling right now, but if that were to happen, there would be very few smiles, except for maybe the slight smug one that said, I told you guys this was going to happen, which is the same one. By the way, if you have friends that are concerned about zombie attacks, as you and he are running away from the zombies, he would have that same look on his face, which is, I told you this was going to happen. So the point of my talk is, let's think about these things now. Let's have this conversation. Alfresco wants Alfresco to outlive Alfresco. That's John. If you ask John Newton, he wants this to happen. we need to keep these conversations going. We have the passion, we have the people, we have the tools to make it happen. We just need to actually do the work. So thanks. I'll be here the rest of the day if you want to talk more about it.
Obviously, after that talk, you understand why I said he's #1 community star. So thanks a lot, Jeff. We are ready for lunch, but if you have one question, I can handle it now, and otherwise we have a series of questions afterwards. Here we have one.
If I respond to all of the questions you raised, can you put it on your blog post that goes along with this so that everybody knows?
Of course. I always approve of your comments unless I'm on vacation or something. But yeah, of course. Yeah. If anyone's ever commented on my blog and it hasn't shown up, something is broken, even if you're saying that I'm a jerk or I don't know what I'm talking about. Which, by the way, that may be valid criticism of what I just showed. You might be like, what the hell is he so excited about? Like, nothing's ever going to happen to Alfresco, and if it does, it'll all work out. And if that's your viewpoint, that's fine. It's okay to make that argument.
Okay, so we're ready for lunch, and thanks again, Jeff.